only
2
way to
minutes after
start
7.
your
This is
day.
Kenya's biggest conversation, The Situation Room. Thank you very much for joining us in the second hour of the show. We're here until 10 a.m. and we're now live on KTN Home, in addition to being live on Spice FM and live streaming the show on Spice FM KE, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. In the room is Eric Latif, CT Muga, and Ndu, of course. CT, welcome back once again to those that had not seen you for 2 days. What was it?
The proverb for today? Being a leader is like a borrowed garment.
Being a leader is like a borrowed garment.
This is a Ugandan saying.
Being a leader is like a borrowed garment. It's not yours.
Essentially, if you're a leader, your nickname is borrowed garment.
But you have to give it back at some point. You're not there permanently.
It doesn't matter how long it has been lent to you for, it is borrowed and you have to give it back at some point or the other.
It's not yours.
No.
It don't belong to you.
No, it isn't. It never did. No matter how well it fits you, no matter how good it looks on you, no matter how you've gotten used to it, it isn't yours. It has to be given back.
Okay. Suruali ya kuazima haisitiri matako. Doesn't sit.
Yes, it reminds me of an ancient song in the days I was youthful, albeit young. I said, gentleman, Tanzanian gentleman, Mbarak Mwishe. Yes. Mali ya mwenzio sio mali yako ya kujivunia. That was a song. Yes.
Ya mwenzio si yako.
Si yako ya kujivunia. Yes.
Always keep that in mind.
Keep the perspective in check.
It's not yours.
No, it's not yours.
All right. Ndu. So we are celebrating the end of the Francophone week. What is that?
Okay, so Francophonie Days is celebrated on the 20th of March every year. And so then you have Francophonie Week, which basically gives an opportunity to celebrate the French language and culture around the world. And so it's a week of several functions, different markers for the celebratory period. And what it does is it provides an opportunity for French speakers around the world to celebrate the French language in all its diversity. And so we're still, of course, looking at former colonies of France. And we also understand that French is just not spoken in France, but other countries in the world as well, other European countries having French as their national language. And so it's a week where across the world, those who speak French and those who practice its culture have an opportunity to celebrate the diverse elements of the language and the culture. And so we're coming to the end of that this week and having an opportunity to look at details of what it really is about and what there is to continually celebrate about the language and its culture, and also its far-reaching effects around the globe.
Well, that there's something to celebrate is clear, and that the French had colonies all across the world is clear. And that for a long time and for many places, even as we currently speak, it is a preferred language of trade. However, when you compare it with other languages that have in the recent past become significant, for instance, Mandarin or even Spanish, you will find, for instance, that there are very, very many Americans who not have learned, speak Mandarin fluently, speak Spanish fluently. So the question that begs to be asked is, given the importance that this language must have, for the native speakers and those who over time, through assimilation and through influence, have acquired the language, what is it that has been done to position this language rightfully and to bring about the influence that this language would bring? I mean, from a lay perspective as a Kenyan, if I have a business and I hope to be intercontinental, talking about just the African continent, and I want to do business with the certain parts of the western part of this continent, it would be in my interest to actually understand French. Yes. But the question I'm asking, what are these things that the native speakers have done to ensure that their language takes that central position that languages like English, which we're speaking now, and others have taken, so that they are part of the influence that brings about the results that they desire?
And why is it important then to also celebrate this Francophone week?
Well, I think you look at what the president of France did, for example, Macron decided. Because, look, I think when you look at the preservation of language, when you're coming about the preservation of language, there's the danger that that language will become extinct, that the language and its culture will leave. So when you look at practices that bring about the preservation of any language, it is so that that just does not happen, that it doesn't disappear, and that the different tenets of that culture just don't get, swallowed up by anything else. So by the time you see them celebrating and commemorating, it's not because, they've had a fancy old time, but that they don't want the language to disappear. And so they're going to do everything that they can to continue to celebrate it and make sure that it continues to permeate culture around the world. So why is it important to celebrate it? Because they don't want it to die. They want it to be preserved.
So perhaps these things that they have done to maintain it is what our guests will be telling us about, won't they?
Absolutely.
Among other things, of course.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
So, so there's a significant part of the continent that still continues to speak French. And if you go to French West Africa, for example, and you've had the opportunity to be to France, you will be able to draw significant parallels between how the culture is practiced and what still continues in France today, for example, or even countries like Belgium, certain parts of Switzerland, that they still... in West Africa, in a lot of countries, the influence is extremely heavy. From language to practice to culture, extremely heavy.
What I've always found interesting is whenever we talk about these countries, we focus on Europe. Canada is bilingual.
It is.
Yes. And there's a very strong French presence. Is it that I read literature that does not include the Canadians, or is it that the Canadians are never really part of this discussion?
They are, but the thing is that the division that you see between French and English is comparatively, the English-speaking part of Canada is significantly larger than the French-speaking, whereby you have two territories in Canada that are French-speaking, the rest are English. So, it's much smaller than anywhere else.
But does that mean it's less significant just because it covers a smaller population?
To them, yes.
Politically speaking, that is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's bring in the French ambassador to Kenya, and her name is Aline Kuster-Menager. She joins us on the line. We'll be having her on video shortly. Good morning, Madam Ambassador.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Now that it's francophone, right?
Now you're learning French with me.
He's learning French.
But madam, we will not go beyond bonjour. If we really make a
why not?
sterling effort, we may say merci. And then I think we'll be done.
We end it there.
Your accent is perfect.
You're very kind. Thank you.
So, Madam Ambassador, just tell us about the Francophone Week and what's been happening in the Francophone Week in terms of how have you, especially being the ambassador to Kenya, how have you and the other countries that speak French been celebrating in the country?
Thank you for organizing this live debate with my colleagues, who are in line also. The Francophonie is a big family. It's literally Francophonie means those who speak French, but it's also a community, an organization, what we call the Organisation de la Francophonie, who regroup those Francophone countries. Indeed, you mentioned some of them. Indeed, a lot are in Africa. We count 28 African countries, among them very close neighbor to Kenya. And also, as you mentioned, we have in Europe countries like Belgium, Switzerland, where French is an official language, which shares with other languages. You also mentioned Canada. Indeed, in Canada, Quebec is a Francophone area and is very strongly attached to its Francophone culture. What I would say is on all continents you find, because of historical reason, Francophone and the language itself has evolved, and each country has its own way to speak French, accent. It's part of the culture. That's what I would like to insist on. Your journalist mentioned preserving language. Indeed, the diversity of language, preserving language, is about identity, is about culture, is about arts. And when it comes to French, indeed, we are not at the stage that we have to preserve our language. We have 500 to 800 million French-speaking people in the world, and it's a booming language for many reasons, also because Africa is a lively continent. But it's about promoting our language, promoting our culture, promoting a world where diversity remains. And I would rather say preserving diversity.
So it goes beyond language. It's also about culture and everything else.
Indeed, indeed.
Why is it important? I can understand it from I can see very clearly from the preservation of language. I mean, just like you said, different places in the world speak French differently. But then why is the preservation of French culture specifically important outside of France?
I mean, French does not belong to France. Indeed, it started in France and in the Francophone area in Europe. But for historical reasons, like English, like Spanish, like Portuguese, it has spread around the world, historically speaking. And it's important for us to preserve this dimension. And indeed, a world where everybody would speak a poor common language would be very boring. Let's put it like this.
Madam Ambassador, let me ask you this question. What are the efforts that you would say have been made to get more people, say within Kenya, to actually speak the French language?
So I would like also to insist on this Francophonie Day. We don't work alone. I work with all my colleagues here who are part of the Francophonie. I would like to mention indeed Belgium, Switzerland, Canada, and also some of our African friends. And we have also Egypt, which is a big country, which is not at the start Francophone as such, but where there is a strong tradition of Francophonie. And our colleague from Egypt in Kenya is a good example of that. He's a perfect Francophone. I don't know if they are with us today because it was supposed to be a group debate, and I'm not the only one to speak. When it comes to the Francophonie manifestation, what I would like to say, we work together to kind of build a program where the language indeed plays a big role. So it includes the schools, it includes the Alliance Française, it includes debate on live in French, but it also includes culture. And this year we chose to put some emphasis on animation, cinema, film of animation. And there is a program that you can find actually on our site, which is a very interesting one. And indeed, we are very glad that a lot of our Kenyan friends were able to join this program, and it includes here completely the Kenyan.
Right. Indeed, as you said, Madam Ambassador, yes, we are going to have a conversation with you, the French ambassador. We're also joined by Nicolas Nihon. He's the ambassador of Belgium. Later on, we'll have a conversation as well with the Egyptian ambassador to Kenya, Khalid Al-Abiad, and the Swiss ambassador to Kenya, Patrick Egloff. Now we have Ambassador Nihon on the line with us. Ambassador, just like your colleague, the French ambassador, has said, there are many countries in Europe and in the world that speak French, and yours is among those that has been celebrating this Francophonie week. So just the same question that CT was asking, what is it that has been made by countries such as yourself and France and the others to spread the knowledge of the language of French in Kenya?
Well, I mean, my country is a slightly different position as France. My country is officially trilingual. So we have three national languages, which are actually Dutch, French, and German. The majority of people in my country speak Dutch almost 60% of the people in Belgium speak Dutch. Almost, I would say, 40% of the people speak French in Belgium, and you have a tiny I would say 1% speak German. Actually, Belgium is geographically situated between France, Germany, and the Netherlands, and that explains why we have such a diverse linguistic landscape.
Yeah.
So we are a federal state with a very high degree of devolution. And actually, everything that has to do with culture and education and language is in the hands of what we call our communities, and not in the hands of the federal state. Hence, this is the reason why Belgium, being a trilingual country, is of course not as such, I would say, promoting French, because we would have to promote the three languages, but every one of our communities is actually promoting one's own language. And that is why in the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, the International Organization of Francophonie, which we will be talking later, I suppose, Belgium is not only a member of, but also what we call Wallonia Brussels, which are the two main entities in Belgium who speak French. So we don't have a specific program as such to promote French in Kenya, but we, of course, like other countries like France, Switzerland, and so on, we are very much part of this cultural effort to promote diversity, because as you know, English is a bit the language that is a bit stifling the diversity in the world. You know, today everybody has to speak English. It's a must, which is right. But at the same time, it's very important to promote other international languages like French, but like Spanish and others.
Definitely, if we're looking at former French colonies, this is you, Madam Ambassador. Definitely, I can see how this would help in the proliferation of French and its culture around the world. Do you depend on former French colonies to help out with this? If we're looking at specifically the African continent, for example, to continue to push the French language and its culture, against the backdrop that several countries might be looking towards their own nationalism, state sovereignty, and things like that. Do you still depend on them to be able to push this celebration, for example, the preservation of culture and language, specifically of French?
Sure that the word depends is the right word. We form a community. Indeed, French is part of their history. It's also, for many of them, their official language. It's also a lingua franca, because as you know, in some of these countries, there is not only one local language, but many of them. And what we find is that where the French is very lively, actually, is where there are a multiplicity of languages, which doesn't help people to really communicate. But no, French belongs to them. They've taken it up. They have their own way to put. I spent at least 15 years of my career in Africa, and I can tell the difference between the French as it is spoken in Cameroon or in Congo or in Benin. There are differences. It's also about culture, as I said, and culture is strictly meddled with languages, and so new words appear, new way, and it's part of the interest of these communities to be together and to reinforce our respective cultures. Indeed, the bigger numbers are in Africa, Francophone Africa. But not only, everybody has its space in this Francophone community. You mentioned Canada. Quebec is a very lively area for French speaking, for culture, for cinema, songs, and so it's not about the numbers or a kind of dependence and we want to make big figures. It's about promoting culture together, interacting together on our respective cultures. We are not at the same situation when it comes to French. Indeed, the Belgian ambassador explained it very well, and it's also part of our community. It's a common language, but different ways.
That is true, but if I were to refer this question to the Belgian ambassador, Your Excellency, it is true, and I like the idea of the three languages. It's good information. However, if I were to look at the linguistic influence in the colonies that Belgium had, French seems to have taken the front row. If I look at Belgian Congo, as it was called then, which is actually 76 times the size of actually Belgium itself, the language, one doesn't hear of any German language influence. One doesn't hear, if you got Rwanda, which was then Rwanda-Urundi, which was Rwanda and Burundi, again, it's the French language. So why was this preference for the French language when, as you say, it's only 40% of the linguistic capacity that the country has?
Well, I mean, my background is historian, and I don't know if the listeners of Spice FM have some patience to listen to a long explanation. So I'm going to make a very long story short. You have to know that when Belgium was created and broke away with the revolution from the Netherlands, this country was established with only one national language, one language in the administration, and that was French. Why? Because at that time, the elite would speak French, and for almost a century, French was really the dominant language until what we call the Flemish movement. Some intellectual in the north of the country said, no, that's not right. In the northern part of the country, we have dialects, Flemish dialects that look alike like Dutch, and we want this culture to be recognized. And there was a whole cultural fight, endeavor to see actually Dutch being recognized as a second language of Belgium, which is now today the first, because the demographics makes that in the northern part of the country, they're more populous than in the southern part. In the southern part, we had other dialects, Walloon dialects, which were coming from the Latin, and actually people were assimilated to French. So at the moment of the colonization of the Congo, the main language of administration was French, even though the Dutch was seeping into the Belgian system. But this is why French was imposed as a language of administration in the Congo. And now I would like to turn to the future and say now, in echo of what the French ambassador said, now this is what these countries make out of it. It's just like in Kenya, where English was imposed on the native languages. I'm always very amazed by the linguistical skills of the Kenyans, who always speak their own mother tongue, Swahili, and then English. And this is what this is what you make it. As far as Kenya is concerned, you adopted it completely. And I think in Congo, I think they largely adopted it. And now it's up to them to see what they want to make out of it and what they want to have as a place in the Francophonie.
Time for us to take a break, and we'll continue the conversation with the French ambassador, Aline Kuster-Menager, and also we'll be joined after this break by Khalid Al-Abiad. He's the Egyptian ambassador to Kenya. Ambassador Nicolas Nihon, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll hope to catch up with you again shortly.
Thank you.